Welcome to ICE's International Conference on the Nexus between domestic and international politics. So today we have like three panels all together from the morning until the afternoon. So I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you for coming in such an early morning. Before we start, let me invite His Excellency Kasit Pirom. He was the career diplomat and long-term serving at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His former post, including, some of you might not have been born yet, Soviet Union, the Russia, Russia, and importantly, Japan. And the last post was at the Washington, D.C. So he, accumulates a lot of professional experience, and I think he would be very suitable to give the opening remark to all of us. Thank you for coming, Kun Kasit, and please.
สวัสดีครับ Good morning everyone and thank you very much ISIS of Chulalongkorn and the Japanese Embassy in Bangkok for giving me this honor to say a few things, a couple of remarks, and hopefully it will not shock you. They will not shock you, but your spirit in view of the upheavals going on around the world and inside Thailand. Let me start with a bit of the Thailand-Japan's relationship since we are here in Thailand and the host of this event is the Japanese Embassy. About 40 years ago, I was one of the leading negotiators on the restructuring of Thailand's-Japan's economic relationship. And the outcome was the agreement on both sides for the Japanese government and the private sector to help Thailand move out of the import substitute industries into the export-led industries, which resulted in immense economic development of Thailand and the ability of Thailand to withstand the threat of communism and the so-called domino theory. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Japanese people for all the help, assistance, and the support to make us what we are today, remaining still intact and still have some confidence to move on in this very fast changing world. And today, standing here, I think we need a second relationship with Japan for the fact that Thailand is more in the direction of arena. Needs to restructuring of its economic regime. And in that sense, Thailand is no longer on the front line stage. Thailand has become more of a secondary importance to Japan. And I think the frontline state, from the Japanese point of view, from my point of view, are not only South Korea and Taiwan, but especially the Philippines, Vietnam, and to a lesser extent Malaysia and Indonesia. So Thailand more or less had been put in more of the secondary role, and that necessitates some sort of a more intense dialogue between Thailand and Japan where and how we should do together. And on top of that, Japanese economic interest in Thailand was very much based on the auto industry. And so far, I think the major Japanese company have not decided as yet whether to go to the electric cars and all of this. And the auto industry in Thailand is more or less kept in suspense, in abeyance, not knowing exactly where to go. So there is a need, therefore, from the economic point of view for the two sides to really take stock of where and how we should do together to help to further the industrialization process of Thailand. So one homework to all the diplomats inside the Japanese embassy. Second point, second remarks, a bit on ASEAN. I wrote an article for the Bangkok Post a few weeks ago on the ASEAN in disarray. And I have asked the Secretariat to dispute the copies to all of you. I hope that you have the time to read it. I write 2 articles a week in the Thai language for the Nao Na newspaper. And for those that can read Thai, please go and look at the Nao Na website. If not, consult Google and AI and so on for the translation. My articles are about Thai politics, regional affairs, and international affairs. It might be of interest to you to know how a retired Thai senior citizen look at the world and the going ons in the region of Southeast Asia and in Thailand in particular. As to ASEAN, I think the notion of ASEAN centrality is only a notion. And it seems to be in decline. With the advent of the Quad's arrangements, AUKUS, and a couple of trilaterals, security cooperation between the United States, Japan, South Korea, between the United States and Japan and Australia, the United States with Japan and the Philippines. And on top of that, Japan security relationship with India and Australia and so on. At the same time, there is a sort of split inside ASEAN. Laos and Cambodia seems to become more and more the client state of China. Vietnam is improving the relationships with the United States, even on the security matter. Japan is helping both Vietnam and the Philippines to beef up its military capability and so on. And in that sense, ASEAN centrality is being affected. And the ASEAN notion of amity and cooperation, ASEAN declaration on the nuclear-free zone, the zone of freedom and neutrality seems altogether to be completely forgotten. And I think the problem is how each of the ASEAN member states were to keep the balance between its bilateral interests and the common goals of ASEAN. And unless and until the present ASEAN leadership, and especially under the chairmanship of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim of Malaysia to take stock of the ASEAN cooperation and direction, then ASEAN will be only a name and entity without the identity, without the spirit, without the vision and the determination. And I hope that the leaders could come together, reset ASEAN. And my idea about ASEAN for the future is a non-aligned one, but at the same time playing the moderating role, trying to bring sense and sensibilities to the major players of the world, particularly the United States, China, the Russian Federation, and Japan, and so on. ASEAN could play the bridge, could be able to, I think, enhance the ability of the ASEAN Regional Forum to be a forum for all, not a forum for security matters, but a forum for peace and common prosperity. My third point, I have become quite intrigued lately with Costa Rica for the fact that for the past 70, 80 years, it had no army, no military establishment, but has been able to develop democracy, maintain cordial, positive relationship with its immediate neighbors, whether Panama or Nicaragua and so on. Then the question that cropped up in my mind is that why not other countries in the global south, beside Costa Rica and a couple of island nations in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean and so on, start to think about doing away with the armored forces. Each one of them, even Thailand, cannot defend itself. So why have army and armored forces? Why not become an unarmed country? Work for peace and cooperation and make a noise at the United Nations and to regional organizations. In America, it is Organization of the American States and a couple of American continent-based regional organizations. Get the protection and the cooperation from all of these organizations instead of having wasteful military establishment. Thailand in particular is a founding member of the ASEAN community. It doesn't need 200,000 soldiers and so on. All the borders with the neighboring countries should be the border of peace and cooperation, and work together to overcome all the cross-border criminal activities. Joint patrols should be part of the working relationship and the confidence building measures. At the same time, Thailand can work together with fellow ASEAN member states in a joint keeping forces under the UN blue helmets. So a rethinking among the ASEAN member states and most of the developing countries around the world and so on should be in the direction of less military, more confidence building measures, getting the United Nations and other regional cooperation organizations at work for peace and to pursue the common happiness and prosperity. And I leave a couple of points for your deliberations. And hopefully that all of us from now on would work more towards peace. Incidentally, I was recently appointed by the Hiroshima Peace Center as a special advisor. I'm also a member of the Asia Pacific Leadership for Nonproliferation. So it's not out of my own inclination, but I am now psyching myself to be a man of peace. And in that sense, I would like to invite all of you and your colleagues and so on that let's start on the peace thinking and let's become more less worry about security matters. I think that's a human obligation to be able to live and work together in harmony and not to distrust and antagonize one another. There is so much madness going on around the world. And in that sense, I must express my deep disappointment at the North American leadership, at the Western Europe leadership, and so on, for this view about fear, threat, perception, for more armaments, for more confrontational stance, and so on. What's going on? What's wrong with us? We are human beings. We have the intellectual capacity, and therefore we must have the heart to speak to one another. And I always also go for this diplomacy and dialogue. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณมากครับ
Good morning, again, everyone. Welcome again to our sessions. Without further ado, let me introduce my distinguished panelists today in the session one. There are actually four speakers, but unfortunately, two of them cannot be with us physically and kindly join us online on Zoom. You probably can see them on screen. So thank you very much for being here. So let me introduce first Professor Kong Yun Fong. He's the Lee Ka-ching Professor in Political Science at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at National University of Singapore, co-director of the Center of Asia and Globalization at the Lee Kuan Yew School as well. So second one is Professor Zhu Feng. He's professor and dean of the School of International Studies at Nanjing University from China. And third, Professor Ken Jimbo. Professor Kimbo is a professor at the Faculty of Policy Management Graduate School of Media and Governance at KO University. And the last one, our familiar face, Professor Titinan Pongsutirak, Professor of International Relations at the Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University, my predecessor as the former ISIS Thailand directors and currently still our senior fellows. So as you may see from the, their detailed bios, they are distinguished scholars in international relations and international politics, focusing on geopolitics, international security, and regional security studies. So we are lucky to be able to gather them here and share their view on the first sessions about the nexus between domestic and international politics. And probably let me start quickly, to just give you a broad context, probably every morning when you wake up, right? I mean, like similar to me, sometimes, surprising news coming up from the US, and you probably think to yourself, like, what's going on with the world? On the one hand, the US president seems to side with Russia, voted with North Korea against, Ukraine peace in the UN. So this is like something we haven't experienced for quite some time, and I'm not sure this is like the ongoing change in international orders is gonna last for. So how long it's gonna last, right? Is it gonna be just temporary, or just like, just for these presidencies. So probably four of you can probably share with us, what we can learn from domestic change in the U.S. and the way in which the president of the United States, approach international communities this way. So perhaps I would just give the order to Professor Yun Fong and Ju Feng, and then Professor Jim Kimball, and then Professor Titinan. Each of you will probably have 10 minutes in the first round to share your initial thought, and we'll follow by the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks so much, Paul, for inviting me to this international conference. I would have liked very much to be there in person, but because I have to teach a class later this morning, I'm really grateful that you say we can participate via Zoom. This first session is about domestic political changes in the US and their impact on international and regional order. I think I'd like to make 3 or 4 points in the time that I have. The most consequential change was, of course, the presidential election last November and the return of Donald Trump to the White House. Also very consequential is the Democrats losing its majority in the Senate, thus allowing the Republicans to control both the Senate and the House. As we all know, Republican control of the Senate means it's much easier for President Trump to get his key appointments through, and Republican control of both houses give Trump the upper hand when it comes to passing bills, not to mention, a party that fears opposing him and his policies. So what I'm trying to get at is this. The first thing to say about US domestic politics is that there was no repeat of January 6th, as some feared. Many expected a much closer election that would have dragged out the vote counting and ended maybe with the losers storming Congress, right? So polarized is the American electorate. But that did not happen. Instead, Trump won decisively, in terms of the electoral college votes, and Kamala Harris conceded very graciously soon. So that brings me to my first point. Trump and his MAGA base are not an aberration in American domestic politics. It's partly my answer to Paul's question. It will be a constant feature, not just in the next 4 years, but for many years thereafter. And because the aspirations, fears, and resentments of Trump and his base have international implications, we need to understand those attributes. And by this, I mean, make America great again, MAGA, assume that America was great in the past, but is no longer great today, or since 2016, let's say. And hence, they need to make it great again, and Trump is the person to do it. But for many of us in Asia, and I would say Europe, America never really lost its greatness. By no means is America a perfect or judicious or restrained superpower, but one whose prestige, credibility, and reliability in general helped uphold world order. Or put another way, many in Asia and Europe assented to US hegemonic leadership. That the US was the indispensable power and the leader of the so-called free world was also the mantra of not just people in Asia and Europe, but all US administrations before and after Trump. The interesting domestic reality in America, however, is that there are now enough Americans who feel and believe like Trump, that America, when it comes to economics, has been conned, taken advantage of, or even raped by the likes of China and Europe. And in security, America has been a sucker, giving free military protection to its allies and strategic partners and not getting anything or enough in return. The domestic political consensus that allowed most post-World War II US administrations to provide the public goods, free trade, military alliances, access to US markets, necessary for upholding international and economic security, I think that consensus is gone. Now, there are good reasons for the fracturing of that consensus, and I think we can talk about it during Q&A if you would like. The second point I'd like to make is that Trump reads his victory this time as he's getting a mandate from his MAGA base to do the things he wants to do domestically and internationally. So on the domestic front, we have seen the evisceration of the deep state, the government agencies that prevented him from doing what he wanted to do in his first term. He's going after his enemies and detractors. He's cowing Congress, and he has appointed like-minded cabinet officials who plead fealty to him. So The Economist in a recent issue has likened Trump to a mafia don. Others see the return of McCarthyism. Whatever you call it, I think the implications for US foreign policy and the international order are already there for all to see. There's no more established and seasoned members of the foreign policy establishment to restrain Trump from his policies. We have a Congress that is unable to check his power. For example, in closing down the key elements of American soft power, such as USAID, and the empowerment of a group of strong China hawks, namely, Secretary of State Rubio, NSA Advisor Waltz, and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. My third point is this: in just 7 weeks, the Trump administration has done enough on the external or international front to bring the liberal international order, the LIO, or the rules-based international order, if you want to put it another way, which is already under severe stress. I think what has happened in the last 7 weeks suggests that that order is at its breaking point. So as Paul mentioned, the world recoiled at the US siding with Russia, North Korea, Iran to vote against the UN resolution that identified Russia as the aggressor in the war against Ukraine. And then we had the blow up in the White House, Zelensky, Trump, Vance, after which Trump denied military supplies and satellite intelligence to Ukraine, luckily restored after the agreement to a ceasefire by the US and Ukraine. And this doesn't even include Vice President J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference that basically told Europe that the threat is not Russia or China, rather it is within that Europe is retreating from its fundamental values. And this is rather rich, coming from someone who refused to say if the election of 2020 was stolen or not. So you have Germany's new Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who was always a strong advocate of transatlanticism, saying that the US seems indifferent to Europe's fate today and it's become an adversary, and Europe needs to become independent. Interestingly, at the same Munich conference, Singapore's Defense Minister Ng Eng Hen said that, and I quote him, America's primacy has become the overriding consideration in its foreign policy at the expense of what he calls bilateral and multilateral ties. Ng went on to say that Asia's image of the US, and I quote him, has changed from liberator to great disruptor to a landlord seeking rent, unquote. So this comes from a defense minister from our region. And that leads me to my last point about America and Southeast Asia in the context of the rising China. What are the implications of Trump's foreign policy for our region, or Southeast Asia in particular? Paul, do I get to show the slides, or we won't be showing the slides? Now, the tariffs have undoubtedly have a negative impact on almost all, with the US putting countries acting as trade diverters or those seeking to de-dollarize via BRICS on notice or in US crosshairs. So here, permit me to share a thought on the issue of past and future alignments of the Southeast Asia 10 vis-a-vis the US and China. Joseph Liao of Nanyang Technological University and I have been conducting a study of the Southeast Asian alignment movements in the last 30 years from 1995 to today. And the figure you see there is we have data up to 2021, and we are in the process of updating it. We basically looked at 5 domains of interaction between the ASEAN countries and the US and China, namely in the political diplomatic, the military security, economics, cultural political affinity, and finally signaling dimensions. And within each domain, we came up with 4 measures, giving us a total of 20 measures of alignment. And this is what we found, that if you look at this figure, over time, there was you can see a general drift of most of the ASEAN countries away from the US and in the direction of China. And if we could move to figure 2 now. Okay, so this is the alignment pattern we found between the period 1995 to 2008, where you see how the various ASEAN countries are lined up based on our indicators. And so if you could click on, just click first click, we can show you how Thailand and Indonesia moved between 1995, 2008, and 2009 and 2021. Great. So you can see that they moved from being in the US camp to being much closer to China. And I think the second click showed the Philippines moving a bit in China's position. This is probably during the Duterte years, but still solidly in the US camp. Next, we can see South Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei and Vietnam moved. All right, they also moved leftwards with the exception of Vietnam, which moved 1 point closer to the US. But what you can say about Brunei, Singapore, Malaysia, and Vietnam is that they are still bunched very much in the center. And if you consider, that to be successful hedging, you can say, they were hedging, although all moved a bit, to the left, away from the US in China's direction. Finally, have a look at Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia. As you can, it's not surprising, as Ambassador said earlier, that these countries actually have also moved, leftwards in China's direction over the last 13 years. Okay. So that's the story that we came up with based on our indicators, which you should take with a grain of salt. Now, and if we go to the next slide, a more recent poll by Pew 2024, not on alignments, but on favorable or less favorable attitudes toward the 2 superpowers, I think, as you can see in this slide, also showed that the global north, US, Canada, and Europe in 2024, before Trump's election, were much more positive about the US than they were about China. But the global south, interestingly, reflecting our findings on ASEAN, in general, is more positive about China. And you can probably say that in the last 2 weeks, both Canada and Europe's attitude toward the US probably would have become more negative, right? Trudeau said that the US really wants to do Canada in, absorb it as the 51st state. Germany is saying that the US is an adversary now, while France is pushing ahead with this idea of strategic autonomy for Europe. Now, of course, this does not mean that their attitudes toward China have become more positive, but it does mean that they will be much less likely to join the US to counter China in the years ahead, in my view. In fact, some Chinese scholars see this as an opportunity for rapprochement with Europe, China's rapprochement with Europe, especially if a peace settlement is obtained in Ukraine. Let me conclude then. Trump seems intent on upending all the conventional expectations that the world has of the US as a benign hegemon whose leadership they crave and assent to, because historically, since 1945, it has pursued its national interests in an enlightened way. That is, in a way that also uplifts allies and partners by its willingness to provide the public goods international economic and security order that makes life predictable and pleasant, and without the madness that Ambassador talked about. But judging from Trump's exercise of power in the last 7 weeks, what the US is doing externally and what is doing internally, I fear that by the end of his second term, the US might have few allies left, or even if there's a few left, these allies will always be questioning the credibility and the reliability of America's words and commitments. Thank you. I think I'll stop there.
Good start to give us a thought and further discussion with the illustrations of that kind of graphic that how the impact of U.S. domestic change having on international relations. So now let me move on to Professor Zhu. Do you share the same view as Professor Kong? What do you think that might affect our region, especially the U.S. approach toward China, as you are from China, and probably you can share the perspective of the Chinese policymakers, about the possibilities and scenario of the incoming futures under Trump administrations and forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Basbara, for your kind invitation. So it's my big pleasure to join this distinguished panelist for some sort of very timely, envisioning what will be happening in the region and as well as some sort of great power relations. First of all, I think the Trump administration really now is making a great revolution in the United States. So the essential points behind the domestic policy and the international behavior has been so dramatically just distancing America from the Biden and the previous administration. So that kind of the U.S. is really very, stunning, and even just horrid to the Chinese, because we don't know what kind of the real effects will be truly produced in stabilizing the international order and continue to, advancing some sort of such a global governance, which could just be very essentially beneficial to all the regional members. So from these points, China is also at a very, very stunning moment on how to respond. But let me first of all just make a very brief summarization what is Trump doing in the United States. I think the American Revolution is not mega any longer. It's some sort of very essential, reshifting of the Americans' domestic and international relations. So I could just very essentially summarize the Trump launched American Revolution on the four fields. First, American Revolution is definitely on the federal governmental system. So where see the Mr. Elon Musk just leading the GOG, just trying to examine the American federal system. Now the USAID also being very fundamentally just being reconfigured, and even 83% of the USAID programs has been totally canceled. Then we'll see next, target probably is the dismantlement of America's national educational, department. So then we also see a lot of hundreds of thousands of the buyouts, the federal workers. And it also caused a lot of, the criticism and protesting in domestic U.S. That kind of Trump launched some sort of was a retooling of American federal system. It's really, really quite radical and also is very revolutionary. Then second Trump launched the revolution is a value revolution. We also see the DEI now is canceled from the school and from the military and from government. And another very important, the notion is LGBTQ. It's also being totally just left behind and also become some sort of the real target that Trump want to what? Want to kill. But as you know, the President Biden used to be considered some most friendly American president to the LGBTQ. But now the Trump administration and the Republican political force just trying to, drowning LGBTQ social phenomenon. Then we will see the transgender women as leader also now is prohibited from, attending the competition. That kind of some sort of new value, revolution now is falling on the U.S. I think the third part of the Trump launch revolution is restructuring the power in the domestic United States. Trump now become an authoritarian leader. Trump becomes some sort of not just some sort of a strongman leadership. He's just trying to also depress Americans' check and balance, political configuration, and also outstanding his presidential, power. So that kind of the Trump's practice also triggering a lot of domestic backlash. Now the more than 22 states, we say such a fury also want to just put the Trump administration's behavior on the seriously judicial opposition. Then all such as some sort of a judicial, legislative, and even with some sort of administrative refiguration of power is also very, very dominating, the process in the U.S. Trump want to make a great use of his presidential, power and outstanding his personal, the decision and the personal influence, and just trying to somehow, we say, overturning American political system. Then such a Trump phenomenon is really, really very historic and also probably will put the Americans' policymaking process into some sort of very, we say, historic, relapping. So I think it's also very, very impressive. Last, I think the part of the Trump revolution, we also know it's also some sort of foreign relations revolution. Traditionally, American foreign policy is very basically based on international liberalism. U.S. is not just the only dominant power. After the break of the Soviet Union, then we will see the U.S. is also, we say now, is moving on some sort of unipolar moment. That kind of a unipolar moment is not just the, we say, configuring on Americans' big, the power primacy. It's also on Americans' full international involvement and engagement. Then behind such two processes, then we will see the central target of Americans' international engagement is liberty and democracy promotion. But now, Trump really trying just turn around and leaving, the liberal internationalism behind and turning on U.S. interest centrism, on Americans' trade protectionism, and even some sort of new round of Americans' populist, engagement to the world. So then that kind of Trump revolution driven and inspired Americans' new dynamic is really, really very, surprising. The China, I think the ASEAN countries, and also rest of the world. But how the Chinese respond, to be honest, I see that kind of the Trump revolution, how lasting it will be. It's still very questioned. Then we will see that, yes, it's a second attempt for the Trump administration. And at the maximum, his power, the in control is just 4 more years. So that kind of the U.S. policy will truly penetrating all the corner of Americans' engagement to the world and its domestic restructuring. I think the question is very, very big. So from this point, I also see probably Trump's, some sort of such a his, the big prosecution of Americans' domestic politics and international politics will not be so lasting. So after the 4 more years, probably we will see the Americans' new administration also will be getting back to the normal. So from this point, I have to say it's still too early to conclude. The Trump administration now just will overwhelmingly just restructure and changed American domestic politics and international relations. Then second, I think a key target of the Trump revolution is get Americans stronger and also more powerful. So that's why I also have to say whatever Trump's revolution is so disruptive, but probably the 4 years also will end with some sort of a new target. US will be going stronger and more powerful. So that just definitely signified the Trump revolution, no matter how it is disruptive, but the power disparity in the world and the unipolar moment probably will dramatically reinforce rather than is truly reconceded. So that kind of points, I also think we should have them in mind. I think the third one is from Chinese perspective, what we're so afraid of from the Trump's, some sort of such a disruption, mostly importantly, it's economic, more economical than geostrategical, because Trump's, such a, we say trade war, like intimidation, and also just presents as the historical, difference. Back to his first term, his trade war is definitely targeting China. Just want to get the China's export to the US is truly declined. But this time, Trump's trade war is not targeting China alone. It will also want to just targeting the entire international community. So from this point, what's the real purpose Trump want to achieve in his second term? As he mentioned, it's a reciprocal, trade. It's a reciprocal tariff. Then the U.S. wants just organize the international regime and global governance. Then the globalization probably will be very horribly just come to the end. That will be most disruptive and also very, very undermining to the Chinese interests, because China now become the number one, manufacturing power in the world. China's export and the trading value also jump over to the number one powers in the world. If the Trump really want just in such a very terrible way, terminate the globalization, how the world economic performance could just present, then some sort of a new such a secession also will be coming back, and the international developmentalism will be came to the end. To be honest, such a geoeconomic implementation of the Trump's revolution matters more than any geostrategic impacts in the eyes of the Chinese. Let me come to my conclusion. So from this point, I think the most important challenge for Beijing is not jumping into some sort of a new geostrategic, the match with the Trump administration. We really have no interest at all. The key variable to determine how the great powers competition will finally just end up. It's not a geopolitical, competition. It's a real high-tech and sophisticated manufacturing updates. So from this point, I see the China's response now should be very cool-minded. I don't see some sort of beneficial geopolitical implications. Trump and the second attempt Trump administration truly bring about to the China. I also didn't see some sort of created geopolitical chaos where also definitely interested serve the China's interest. Instead, now the China-US falling into the new track of a great power competition. It's less geopolitical and more geo-economical. So on this point, I have to say, yeah, how our regional members will respond. In one way, some sort of a power reconfiguration will be going on the regional platform. I don't think that such things doesn't matter at all to the Chinese. Our real eyesight now is definitely on too far. In one way, Trump will just have a reconfiguration the world system in economic and trading relations. Then we also have to be better prepared. If the globalization is truly killed, so, we say badly by the Trump administration, in what way we can respond in maintaining of a developmentalist approach and economic and social stability. So from these points, I see, yes, we should be very seriously wake up to Americans' overturn of its traditional domestic and international course. But the problem is, what's the real effects will be very fatally and eventually just affect the world's stability and development. Yeah. It's also some sort of, we say, very, very sobering and also very pressing challenge for all of us. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ju. So you have like some of an interesting argument and point that we probably can elaborate out during our discussion. So whether or not it's like this international politics totally changed, or it's just kind of reinforcements of the unique polarity of the United States leadership in the world. So what do you think about this this change in the world, or particularly in the Indo-Pacific region? Please.
Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to begin by thanking Thailand ISIS for organizing this remarkable event, and also like to acknowledge our embassy, Japanese embassy in Thailand. I'm very grateful that they are supporting this event as well, and also to the opening speech by Professor Ambassador Kasit Priom for your encouragement to Thai Japan bilateral relationship, and also your passion for the peace development in this turbulent world. And all of your points are very much well taken. And as Paul, laid out in his opening speech, since the inauguration of the Trump administration, I have also been overwhelmed almost every single day by the sheer volume and the speed of developments in the U.S. Foreign relations and the domestic politics dynamics behind them. And it's already been mentioned by two previous speakers. And I do agree that this is not just about the policy changes. It is the fundamental transformation in how the United States operate, both home and abroad. And I began to think that this magnitude of change is unprecedented, and where the traditional understanding of the international order rapidly became obsolete due to the tremendous impact that the Trump administration has been bringing about. And I have also personally experienced the consequence of this shift. At the International House of Japan, as I serve as a managing director of the programs. Four of our key initiatives have been either being cancelled or under the review due to the direct budget cuts from the U.S. Federal government. And one of the most striking example that happened just 5 days before the Truck One Point conference that I organized 2 weeks ago, the entire U.S. delegation was forced to cancel their travel to Tokyo because the Department of Energy, who was the primary sponsor, abruptly suspended its funding. So this seems to be not an isolated case, although I've been victim of those changes. It reflects a broader pattern of the unpredictability and the disruption seems to be in the US governance. And decisions are increasingly driven by personal calculation rather than the institutional processes, with consequences that ripple across diplomacy, security, and economic landscape. So today I'd like to focus on three key aspects to this transformation and their geopolitical implication. Number one is the shift from I think many could call the rule-based governance to the what I would like to lay out is a patrimonialism under the Trump administration. And the second, it seems to be the weaponization of the U.S. institutions and how this affects alliance and security commitments. And the third is the rise of privatized governance. And I think those three are all interrelated, with figures like Elon Musk playing an increasing role in the US foreign policy and also to the national security. And let me go start by first. To understand the structural changes that is happening in the US today, we must move beyond the conventional discussion of whether this is the authoritarianism or it is a nationalism. And I think what we're witnessing is the rise of patrimonial governance, so to say, as the professor or writer Michael Kimmage outlined in the recent Foreign Affairs article. And that is a system where the state is treated as a personal domain of the leader. And it's been, traditionally said by the Max Weber, described patrimonialism is a system where the state is treated as a personal domain of the leader, replacing formal institution with a personal royalty of networks. And unlike bureaucratic governance, patrimonial rulers dismantle institutional checks and central power in informal personal relationship. And you can find those kind of series of actions in the following manner. And number one is dismantling the bureaucracies. Since taking office, Trump has purged career civil servants and replaced them with loyalists, and many of whom lacks policy expertise. And the second, foreign policy by personal instinct, and traditional diplomatic channels are being replaced by ad hoc royalty-based decision-making. And number three is the blurring of the public and private sector interests, and Trump directly interferes in the regulatory processes, law enforcement, and economic decision-making, and that favors political allies and punishing opponents. And that's the kind of category that I would like to say in the first aspects. And the second is the weaponization of the US institutions. And I think where the state agency and the financial tools and even the military assets are being used not for the national security per se, but also for the political survival. And you can find on the politicization of the security agencies, including the Department of Justice, FBI, and intelligence services, increasingly being directed to target Trump's political opponents and weakening its credibility. And the second is the erosion seems to be happening in the civil service independence and career officials in the state, defense, treasury have been removed and the decision making more erratic and also unpredictable. And seems to be there has been a lots of loyalty test has been going on. Even though I mentioned about the several of my projects are under the review, I have been forced to respond to the 32 question raised by the federal government and how much this our project that is underway has been in line with this loyalty test there. So this is a critical test that I'm being going through, and imagine what the federal government, members are dealing with day by day in past 2 months. And why this matters, and I think that when legal institutions and financial resources are no longer neutral instruments of the governments, but the weapons for the political survival, and I think that that really creates the check and balance notion of the American democracy seems to be under heavy challenges. And finally, that is the privatized governance and security risks. And I think that the new and troubling dimension of the U.S. governance is the privatization, as I mentioned, and especially that is icon by the Elon Musk's Dodge initiative, and that has been blurring the lines between corporate interests and also the national security. And the intelligence sharing with our allies become very much compromised as the sensitive data and now accessible to private individuals without institutional oversights. So that that really creates the geopolitical context. And I'll stop here by mentioning about what could be the major components of the geopolitical challenges from those domestic shift is underway. And the first and foremost, from especially Japan is the major ally in Asia, and that creates the certain level of the decline of the U.S. alliance reliability. And as already been mentioned in Europe, NATO's ability to deter Russia has become more, I think, unstable if Trump administration tried to sideline European allies in the Middle East. The U.S. somewhat withdraw from the commitments might lead to the security vacuum and forcing Israel and Gulf states to reconsider their own alignments. And also in our region, Indo-Pacific, if the security commitments to Taiwan and Japan, Korea, Australia become conditional or on the personal basis, and I think that those also create a lot of the turmoils in how such kind of configuration of the order to be created. And as you remember, our former Prime Minister Kishida once said that the today's Ukraine will be tomorrow's East Asia. He mentioned that the two regions' security situations are interconnected with each other. And this really triggered why Japan and the IP4 members try to engage NATO more, and we are asking NATO to engage in Asia in a mutual sense. But under the Trump, today's Ukraine could be the tomorrow's East Asia in a very different context. And this is something that we have to take seriously in our mind. If that kind of punishing the allies and try to deal with adversaries could take place in Europe, how could you say that it would not take place in Asia? And this is something of the major, I think, risks that we have to take into our mind. In addition to the ongoing erosion of the multilateral governance, and the second, finally is the risk of economic and technological fragmentation that has been already taking place. So key takeaways here. Number one is that the United States foreign policy is no longer rule-based. It is very much driven by the current character of the White House. And secondly, alliance seems to be it's more like subscription based. That if the United States contents are streamed, it has to come up with a pricing. And if the pricing will not be met, and there will be a lot of like a condition that we really need to struggle. And finally, the privatized governance is seeming to be eroding the traditional national security structures. So I have become very much, cautionally and pessimistic over the trends that is taking place, especially in past 2 weeks. And I think that this could be the shared notion that everybody in the room need to elaborate further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. That's quite alarming and very pessimistic view. And I don't know if Professor Titinan is going to share the similar view of this kind of pessimism of the international orders, especially in Indo-Pacific.
Thanks, Ken. Hey, good morning. Sawasdee krap. And I would say that first, I'm very cold. And I agree with everything that Professor Ken Jimbo has said. I think also I want to congratulate Ajahn Pongpisut for organizing, assembling a top lineup for this morning. Professor Kong Yun Fong and then Professor Ju Feng and Professor Ken Jimbo. Really enjoy interacting with them and their remarks. It's never been a more exciting time to be an international relations teacher in our profession, right? But it's never been a more alarming time to be an inhabitant of the global system. I've concluded that of all the things I've read and thought about, that in the end, Buddhism has something to offer how we understand the world. Either we are born in peacetime or we are born in wartime. We've been lucky to have been born in peacetime. But if we are not so lucky, we might see a war before we go out. There's a tyranny of anarchy here that we thought we got away from. But in fact, anarchy is tyrannical, which means that in the end, ultimately, the international system is anarchic. I mean, it's, you have a state system and there's no centralizing authority. In the end, we thought that the European project, the European Union, was the way out. You set up, after World War II, the right kind of rules and institutions, and you can resolve and mitigate conflicts, and you don't need to have a world war anymore. But now you see that there's a war in Europe, and there could be conflicts in Asia, as we've heard. So sometime from now, we will look back, and I think what we're seeing is a breakdown of the global system, of the international system and the global order as we have known it. And some years from now, when we look back, I think this could be the moment when the United States voted with Russia on the UN resolution to condemn the Russian aggression against Ukraine, the 3rd-year anniversary. This is astonishing. Right? So it's a telling vote because the US was the chief architect of the international system, of the rules-based, so-called rules-based. You mentioned rules-based in South Asia. I think is a euphemism for subjugation and domination. But, for us, generally, we can think of it as rules-based. Some people also say liberal, but I think it's rules-based international order. The US was the chief architect. And for the US to toe the line, to vote with the chief breaker of this rules-based system is Russia. It just means that the US is no longer going to underpin, and support this rules-based system that they actually set up. Now, the question for us is, why? How did we get here? There's a degree of disbelief. I wake up like a John Paul every morning. I think, I cannot believe this is happening. And the degree of disbelief to me is akin to when the pandemic happened. In February 2020, you think, can this be real? Right? And then by March, borders were shut. And by April, May, lockdown. And we think, wow, you stay home. You come home. And this is really happening. About mid-2020, we're going nowhere. There's nowhere to go, no one to see. You stay home. that kind of disbelief that I feel now with the international system. And that disbelief for the pandemic, we got over it because once we saw that, okay, you know, we wear masks and then we take precautions and then we have the vaccines and we can kind of see the bottom of it. And we thought, okay, we'll get over this. But in the breakdown of international order, there is no bottom. Geopolitics is in free fall. And anything can happen. Is manifesting in the geo-economic arena. But then you think about, you know, how long can this go on for as a geo-economic war? We have a geo-economic war now. This is to me, I mean, if you look at the logic, the drivers, the direction, this is geo-economic warfare. All the tariffs being wielded in the US against China and the retaliatory tariffs. I mean, what's happening with US and Canada and EU is amazing. It's astonishing. It's appalling. It's unbelievable. These are the closest US allies. They're going at it geoeconomically. And then the question becomes, you know, how long can this go on for before it becomes a different kind of conflict? So I put that up as a kind of the epiphany. This is the moment when it really broke down. Some years we could think that could be a moment, but there could be other moments of the breakdown. I have just one slide. I just okay. Not to get too. I'm not a big fan of slides, but just the one. But the main point is this: we have to distinguish between Trump the man and Trump the movement. There has been a fixation and obsession with Trump the man. Trump administration, Trump the man. So now, see, the problem with the slides that once you put them up, everybody looks at the slide, they don't listen to you. So I'll have you look at the slide for a little bit. All politics is local. It's a cliche. It's a slogan. It's a motto. So I've written an article in a Bangkok Post that if all politics is local, then all geopolitics is mostly domestic. Of course, there's a nexus. You know, it's a good title. Nexus of domestic and international. Domestic politics, international, you know, foreign policy, foreign relations, international relations. Thailand, you can say Thailand has never been so low in its international understanding. International standing has never been so low. And it's because of its domestic problems, domestic conflict and polarization going back 2 decades. This applies to Japan, but there's one country when this happens and it affects the international system more than any other country, and that's the United States. What we've seen, global disorder really is about US domestic politics. It's about US domestic politics. America is in a bad mood, right? If you want to use American English, like Sarah Palin said, American English, you could say that they're very pissed off. They're very pissed off. America's pissed off. They have a lot of grievances, resentment, vindictiveness, and they want payback. Payback for what they're doing now, but also payback for what they've already done. They want payback for what they've done already, what they've given. Now, Trump the man versus Trump the movement. America first, MAGA, and I think Professor Yun Fung is still there. It would be great to engage. I wish you were here. We can really engage in this conversation. He mentioned about Professor Yun Fung about, you know, the MAGA, how I see 3 elements to it, Professor Yun Fung. First, great again means that they used to be great, right? So think about when was it? When were they great? How was it lost? How was greatness lost? And how will greatness be regained? Those are the 3 elements to the MAGA movement. I take it literally. So in short, I mean, not enough time, but basically at home there'll be nativism and abroad economic nationalism, protectionism, mercantilism. America first, MAGA. So this is what Trump the movement is about. Trump the movement is about. Trump the man is very blustery. You can say that he is misogynist, chauvinist, all kinds of issues with him. I think the transactionalism and unpredictability are a function of the movement. I think it's a cliche. I don't think, of course, he's going to be transactional. He'll be unpredictable because the way that he approaches the MAGA, this kind of geostrategy in terms of deal making will make him very transactional and unpredictable. But in fact, within the realm of predictability. I don't want to go too long. I just want to say that when you think about America first, since we're going back in the past in our international relations, I went back to my old books, in old bookshelves. And then lo and behold, I picked up this journal called The National Interest. And there's an article called America First, Second, and Third by Patrick Buchanan. And it was from spring 1990. And I remember because there was something about this. I was going to school at that time in the US. I think, this is not somehow, this rings a bell to me. I've seen this before. It's a deja vu. Back in the 1980s, there was this big debate at the end of the Cold War about what America should do. The Buchanan movement was a fringe movement, was a minority fringe movement within the Republican Party. They lost. It's taken them 30 years, basically, to take over the Republican Party and the White House. And now they're front and center. And I just give you a couple of quotes just for flavor, right? We cannot forever defend wealthy nations that refuse to defend themselves. From 1990. How other people rule themselves is their own business. Forget the democracy agenda. The second Trump administration will not be promoting democracy and human rights and elections and so on. How other people rule themselves is their own business. Years after the Marshall Plan, it is time Europe conscripted the soldiers for its own defense. 1990. That position, that movement was a fringe. It lost debate. The established Republicans won the debate, and hence you had Bush, and after Clinton had another Bush, and they went on to the neoconservative drive. Trump would have issue with these guys. If you put Trump and George W. Bush in the same room, Trump would say, "Why did you go invade Afghanistan and Iraq? Yeah, we go after that Bin Laden, kill him, right? But not to invade." So the Trump movement is actually anti-imperial. They don't want to be the policeman of the world. So in fact, the conservative ties should be happy about this. They're not going to be pro-democracy. They're not going to be policing the world. They're not going to care like if you have human rights violations. But then I looked deeper into other books, old books that I read. I thought, this is, I read a book, I read something about Sons of the Soil. So I went back to look, where did this come from? It came from Samuel P. Huntington. Huntington, you would know that he is famous for Clash of Civilizations, right? 1994. And some people would think that he's also famous for the third wave of democratization. And, people old enough in political science would know that he wrote something called The Political Order in Changing Societies back in 1968. But the last book before he died was an unpopular book. It was called Who Are We with a question mark. It was American National Identity. He made the case for America not as a nation of immigrants. This is the title of John F. Kennedy's book, Nation of Immigrants. So Huntington said that America is a nation of settlers. Right? You have three categories. You have settlers, immigrants, and slaves. It's a nation of settlers, not immigrants. And he went on. It sounded racist. It had racial overtones. It was unpopular, and people, didn't want to have anything to do with Sam Huntington after that. But in fact, now it's very much in vogue. So I just had one quote for flavor. In its origins, America was not a nation of immigrants. It was a society or societies of settlers who came to the New World in the 17th and 18th centuries. Its origins as an Anglo-Protestant settler society have, more than anything else, profoundly and lastingly shaped American culture, institutions, historical development, and identity. This is what we have in the Trump movement. And finally, I would have, this, if you're more interested, these are two of the books I'm reading now. The Huntington one is I'm rereading some parts of it, but The Crusader is a biography of Buchanan. But these are earlier incarnations of America First and MAGA. It's about nativism, settler, WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant America, it's white America, economic nationalism, protectionism, mercantilism. And what does that mean for all of us as a last conclusion? So the breakdown of the international system will continue, will get worse, even beyond the Trump term. And Trump even conceded that he will lose the House in the midterm elections. People think that, after the midterms and the Trump movement will be kind of an aberration. And I was very keen to hear from Professor Yun Fung that he also thinks it's not an aberration. It has, roots from long ago, and it will persist. It will transcend this period. And if the Democratic Party gets its act together, and they have a lot to be blamed for having lost so dismally. But if they get their act together and they win, even then, the Trump agenda will continue within the Republican Party, but also in American national politics. You can see that they're not going to come back the way that they used to underwrite and underpin the international system. For Southeast Asia, for Thailand, this is really consequential. I mean, it's really just, it's alarming, and I think portentous and dangerous, because Thailand has nothing to offer the Trump administration, second Trump administration. I don't call it 2.0. It doesn't get better, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, it gets better and better in Windows. But Trump is not like that, so I call it Trump 2. Second Trump administration. Thailand is number 11 on the trade surplus list. Vietnam's number 3. Malaysia number 14. Indonesia number 15. Thailand has a $46 billion trade surplus. And already it's got off on the wrong foot, the Thai-US relations under Trump too, because we sent back the Uyghurs to China against the request, against the preference of Marco Rubio. So that is not going to do well. It's going to bode ill for Thailand. For Southeast Asia, a collection of smaller states, this is like small fry for Trump. He doesn't care about small states. Cambodia, Laos, Brunei, they don't matter to Trump, second Trump. So I think ASEAN now will need, ASEAN's divided, as Ambassador Kassit mentioned, and they have a lot of issues, problems. But now ASEAN, despite the divisions and splits and the range of issues, Russia, Ukraine, US, China, Myanmar, ASEAN will need ASEAN more than ever. And ASEAN will need Japan. We need all the other countries outside the China-US matrix, duality. Thailand will have to look elsewhere. I think it already has joined. It has joined the BRICS as BRICS Plus as partner, but there'll be other forays. I think the Uyghurs deportation was a bad move, but we have a lot to think about for smaller countries when the global system breaks down. New Zealand, Thailand, a lot of small countries are the worst off. The worst off because if the rules don't apply, there are no rules. When might is right, might makes right, and muscularity replaces morality in foreign policy for the US, all bets are off. We're on our own. It's a self-help system, and there's a lot to think about. Thank you. Sorry to see the time.
Thank you very much, Professor Tiedemann. So what can we, gather from both of you in this panel is that, kind of share pessimistic view of the international orders. You see a radical change in the international orders, and the rule setters, became the rule bakers. Then kind of give us some alarming, warning, that we should probably tackle this problem, in the wiser manner, especially within ASEAN itself. If we talk about like, our region, but then you share the same questions that I want to ask everybody. That is it going to be like any change in the futures? You were mentioning about the some of the domestic change in the future, the midterm elections. Recently, I have read some of the interview from CNN. I don't know if you have seen this. They went to interview like those Trump supporters who who lost their job, and they got disappointed. Would this kind of thing be multiplied in the futures, and then that would make the dynamic, change again in the futures, not like prolonging of these kind of unpredictabilities and transactional approach of the United States leadership in the world orders. So probably we have like a few minutes for everyone as we are running short. So Professor Yunfeng, do you have any final thought?
Wonderful session, and I agree with most or virtually all of the comments that my co-panelists have made. And I really enjoyed, Professor Zhu Feng's, four revolutions. And I guess the question then is how fundamental they are in terms of will they be long-lasting, as Paul puts it, or is it, it may change. I think that is the key question that, will be quite interesting to address. And I thought Ken's, taking us through the three items of patrimonialism, weaponization of U.S. institutions, and privatized government. That was really a tour of the horizon that leads us to be pretty worried. All right, and I think the question he raised about the reliability of U.S. alliances, that's a key issue. And of course, I agree very much with Professor Titinan's point about especially Trump needing to go beyond Trump, the person, and the needing to look at the movement that backs him up, the so-called MAGA movement, and the identity of American politics. And he's right on the Huntington volume. One thing I think we haven't raised, now that we have talked about Trump, the person, and the movement, is the structure of the international system and how this all may relate to America's consternation, whether it's Trump, Biden, or even Barack Obama, worries about China's rise. Right? We haven't talked about that, but I'm waiting to see what might happen on that front, because there's one view that says that what Trump wants to get out of Ukraine, and leave the Europeans to themselves, and so that he can make a deal with Russia and China. Sphere of influence argument. The three major powers decide. One will do things in the Americas. One will focus on, Europe, and one will focus on East Asia. So there's this spheres of argument thing that a lot of us are thinking and talking about. The second one, which not so many people have talked about, is whether, given the China hawks that Trump has assembled, when Ukraine is more or less settled, the US will turn its eye to confronting China. After all, Trump, in Trump 1.0, Trump said that I'm not going to let China be bigger than us under my watch. So I'm waiting to see whether, the Trump administration will actually come to that point. I don't know, to be frank. I think I'll stop there.
That's probably the question for Professor Zhu. Can you respond to that questions? How China's gonna deal with this? Ready for transactional deals with the US and allies?
Yeah, I think the question is very fundamental. So as I mentioned, so how enduring the Trump led some sort of Americans transformation last, or well, come to some sort of a truly, different, power reconfiguration of the United States. But my personal observation is this: Trump now is just driving up a wide range of disruptions, but I don't think it will truly and overwhelmingly just with a change the American power configuration. So check and balance is the very, very, we say, essential moment, and the ingredients of our American political system. Trump's disruption, yes, will make it back and forth. But the problem is, I have no idea at all. The Trump will truly just how say restructure Americans' domestic political power structure. So then that kind of Trump-led disruption will be temporary, and it will be just some sort of time limited. But the problem is, all the country, if we just examine as some sort of a policy shifting and a policy restructuring, such a back and forth, and even just a tactless switch are always been happening. So US is not exceptional. So then my so far very primary observation is Trump disruption can be lasting. But the problem is in the coming 4 years, it's not the American people only. It's also some sort of world community. We need to refitting ourselves to some sort of that kind of, we say, new America. So then it's some sort of a taste on how we can respond. It's also some sort of forward-leaning, some sort of restructuring of our policy as well. But the problem is, I don't think the U.S. will finally completely just move on to the new track. It's still too early to say for the moment. So then, yeah. Second, as I mentioned, how will China respond? I don't think Trump administration is truly offer Beijing some sort of strategic benefits. Then we can just exploiting the Trump's some sort of such a very negative impacts. As I mentioned, first of all, whatever Trump's disruption will be going on, then there is no conclusion at all. The power, the redistribution also will be coming soon. Then second, so I think my Japanese friend, Professor Jimbo, also mentioned, for example, so liability of American-led airlines. But the problem is, as I mentioned, Trump administration's, some sort of such a backward is not just well lasting for long. So then such a descriptability of the allies will be resumed sooner or later. So it's still some sort of a very important key, just a moment for the region to what? To readapt to, rather than to re-grapple for some sort of such a security order in the Asia Pacific. So that's from this point, as I mentioned, so China's response should be very, very assumably mind-sobering and also future related and future leaned. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Professor Chu. Ken, you have any?
Well, thank you. It's been very stimulating discussion among co-panelists. And one of the frameworks that I try to decipher the current dynamics, apart from those domestically generated foreign policy, is that it is the kind of great triangle between the America First policy, which Professor Titianan has laid out, and then the economic nationalism associated with all the geoeconomics, economic security dynamics, and then the third is the peace through strength. And I have been wondering that the third part, how that is associated in the Trump administration's mindset, because when you cite Reagan, Roosevelt, it is about speak softly, carrying the big sticks, right? And then intervene if necessary. And that is the base upon the peace through strength argument to shape the international order. But I think that the current version of the peace through strength is pretty much emphasized on the deal making, and then that what is the ultimate objective of these deal, iconically, taking place in Ukraine, is to create the world affairs which makes unnecessary for the United States to intervene. And I think if that is the goal, it is a slightly different version of what the Reagan and Roosevelt have laid out on the very concept of the peace through strength. So that's number one. And the second, I mentioned about so many pessimistic kind of viewpoints on the alliance. But I must say that in the early February, we began a relation with the United States with much of the optimism. Look at Ishiba's Trump summit in April, followed by Modi Trump summit meetings, and they went all well to reconfirm the existing agreements and purposes on the alliance, and that is actually bipartisanly, shaped the importance of the alliance take place in the Indo-Pacific. Whatever the disruption takes place in the other region, Indo-Pacific seem to be stable. That was, I think, our early conclusion in the February. But that after those events takes place, especially in the transatlantic relationship, I repeated, why would you say that the Indo-Pacific should be so special? And this could be I think reconfirmation of the what I tried to speak. And finally, that the Trump 1.0, if you look back at 2017 to 20, Japanese experience of dealing with the Trump 1.0 was not bad at all. Late Prime Minister Abe's personal relationship with Trump was very strong, with obtaining the personal credentials of the trust of what the Japan is doing. I think Japan was able to obtain much more, I think, flexible alternatives to engage, especially in the emerging states and other parts of the world. Remember, Abe met with President Putin 26 times when he was prime minister. And he went to China in October 2018 when the Trump administration was calling China as a revisionist strategic competitor. Abe went to China to say that the Japan-China relationship should be win-win relationship with lots of cooperation and those ideas. Why these kind of things are possible? Because Trump trusted upon what Tokyo has been doing. And this time it is not the case anymore. And I think that those kind of different dynamics needs to be adopted in the through of the elaboration of a foreign policy, how to deal with the alliances and so on.
Thank you. Professor Titinan?
Thank you. 2-3 elements here. First question from Professor Yun Fung about the so-called reverse Kissinger, which means that if Trump makes a deal with Putin like this or settles the European theater, would then he turn around to make a similar deal with President Xi Jinping and then hang Taiwan out to dry, and then maybe a G2, which is the worst scenario one of the worst scenarios for us in Southeast Asia. So the question is Trump going to do what he's doing in Europe, in Asia with China? And I don't think so. I mean, Professor Yun Fung mentioned the China hawks. Apart from the China hawks around Trump, American society is also, they have a lot of issues in America and they cannot agree on anything. And they're not uncommon to them. But when it comes to China in the US, and most Americans, they don't even go abroad. They don't know anything about the outside world. They actually very parochial. But when it comes to China, they don't like China. So it'll be very hard for Trump to dial back his campaign before the election and, US American sentiment, popular sentiment against China. So it would be hard for me to imagine him making a kind of a deal, a G2 deal with President Xi Jinping. So that's my kind of response to that. And then second, another question raised by both Professor Yun Fung and also Professor Zhu Feng about how enduring, durable, persistent, and transcendental is Trumpianism. Whether Trump is he is here for another 3 years, 4 years, and after this he'll go back to the old normal. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. But then the question becomes like, to what extent, to what degree is it all change? How much change? How much continuity? Remember that Obama leading to Trump won and then Biden and Trump won. Actually, were very continuous on industrial policy, on the export controls, on some of the tougher trade measures, tariffs. So in the US, even the Democratic Party has already turned against the international system already. Just a matter of degree. But Trump too is overturning it. It's just upending it. So I think this is going to be enduring and long-term, lasting. And finally, I just say, if you think about Trump, and I mentioned Trump, the man, Trump, the movement, Trump movement goes back to Buchanan before. You can even think before that. Think of the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, the progressivist era after the Civil War. you mentioned Reagan, right? And Roosevelt, right? So Trump talks a lot about McKinley. That's his America great. I think the America great in his mindset is the 1870 to 1913 roughly, and then I think the 1950s. So I think what we're seeing in the Trump projection, Trump geostrategy is partly, this peace through strength is partly Reaganism in the 21st century without the Cold War, blended with a kind of isolationism. But he talks about Reagan. SDI, for example, Strategic Defense Initiative, is very much a Reagan scheme. And I'll just say a final word about, so it goes back even further in Buchanan. And about Japan, you mentioned Japan, Abe, I wish there was another Abe, Abe was really a phenomenon, I think profound, transformative leader, not just for Japan, but for Asia. And I mentioned that, this is a really appreciated exercise. I mean, event, the Japanese embassy supported this event. We need more of Japan's role in this region. I don't know if they have the leadership appetite. I think if they have the leadership, they can get the appetite up to provide an alternative third wave for Southeast Asia. We really need that.
So we have roughly around 10 minutes left. We'll open the floor for audiences to raise some questions if you want to ask. Yes, at the back. You introduce yourself and then ask the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Apichai. Just a question in terms of, can you show the map again, Dr. Titinan? Your map on the UN Ganga resolution, because that enlightened me a bit in terms of in terms of the geopolitics and why Trump is thinking the way he does, right? I mean, if you remember the map, right? I mean, it shows that Russia and US primarily, the big powers, are voting against the resolution, correct? And now I'm thinking, why is Trump interested in getting Canada into the US, right? He wants Canada to be the 51st state. So what is blocking? If you look at the red on top, yeah, Canada is the green. So maybe the rationale behind, I don't know, I'm just guessing now. If you're looking at a map, then if you connect Canada into it, then you find the whole top part all red. Okay? Maybe that's the grand alliance that maybe he's thinking, I don't know. But then coming back to reality in terms of, we know that Michael DeSombre has just been appointed by Mr. Trump, President Trump, to be the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia Pacific. I mean, he used to be an ambassador here, as we know. So what do you think would be his policy to the region? And how could our region talk to Trump through him? Okay, thank you.
Anyone want to answer this?
There are two parts to that question about Ambassador Sombre. He was here for a short time. He was a Trump appointee, first appointee in decades. Normally, there's a career diplomat as U.S. ambassador in Thailand. So first, his policy will be guided by, of course, President Trump himself, Trump White House, and also Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State keeps talking about whatever they do, it has to make America safe, strong, prosperous. So that's something that I think the Sombre will have to work with. Now, the second part of the question is more interesting. Thailand, with Ambassador De Sombre and the Assistant Secretary of State for the EAP is actually down the chain. It's from the White House. It cascades way down here. But because he was ambassador here, I would imagine that there would be some local bridges among the Thais that can talk to him, that can have a discussion with him, access to him, and that could be a boon, could be a benefit to Thailand.
Any other questions? Proceed.
Kasit, fellow of ISIS. One question to all the panelists. Has the present Chinese leadership come to the realization that the unilateral, aggressive, assertive measures and so on has been met with counter move by the United States in the form of ports, AUKUS, and various trilateral cooperation that I mentioned this morning? Because if the Chinese leadership were to retract a bit, it might lead to a more cooperative environment. Thank you.
Why don't I take a step at the question before Prof. Zhu Feng? I'm sure he's the appropriate commentator on this. But let me give a take from Southeast Asia. I mean, from Southeast Asia perspective, it's not China that has been launching one war after another after the end of the Cold War. Right? It's the United States which has been at war, every 3 years or 4 years, according to John Mearsheimer. And despite, it's true that China has been very assertive in the South China Sea. And but given that, and if you look at the figures that I shared with you earlier in my slide, whatever it is in the last 13 years, the countries of Southeast Asia, almost all of them have moved in China's direction, drifted away from America in China's direction, because each in determining their national interests, either because of economics, military security cooperation, they find that China has something to offer. So in that sense, that it has been the region's response. And if you look at the latest Pew poll done by the Pew Research Organization 2024, as I was saying earlier, the rest of the world is also seem to be moving, have a favorable attitude of what China has been doing, all right, except Canada, and much of Europe. But Canada and much of Europe are also changing, given what has happened in the last, 7 weeks. So I think the world is going through a transition on this, and there might be an opportunity, given what Trump is doing, for China and Japan, and the countries and ASEAN, to do something.
Professor Zhu?
Yeah, I think the question is very interesting. So while China also just like getting developed so fast, most important things get back to the early 80s when China declared the reform opened up US, Japan, and the leading economies, and then just help China, just lifting the domestic constraint and dragging China into the centrality of the world economy. So that's also some sort of a consequence of a Cold War, because the Soviet Union used to be the biggest enemy. So then aligning the China against the Soviet Union was some sort of a geopolitical merits. China's reform now opened up is truly enjoyed a lot. But the problem is, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Americans' China policy remain just stay on the same track. So then such a great power coordination and a cooperation, not just create some sort of a very positive moment for China grew up, and also just pushing on some sort of such a wealth accumulation and development in the US and in the Western powers. But the problem is when China just jump over to the number 2 biggest economy in the world, Americans' China policy completely changed. So first term of Trump administration kept China locked into the biggest strategic competitor. So then a lot of strategic pounding and limits and even restriction just come over. So then China-US relations truly dramatically changed. But the problem is China's international strategy by large remains some sort of defensivism, remains some sort of developmentalism. So then from this point, when China faced with American strategic pounding, we also have to respond in some sort of Chinese way. But the problem is, so far, I don't think that China become some sort of revisionist power. Actually, what is very interesting, contrary to the China's continuity, is Trump administration move on to revisionist track. So it's also a big challenge for China. So then that's why I consider no matter how the Trump disruption will be simmering, but China should stay the same. That's also could just how say bring up some sort of new wave of the regional development and the security cooperation. Yeah, let me stop here.
To these questions, yeah.
Well, one of the remaining topics that I wish to share is about the alliance burden sharing issue. As Professor Titinan mentioned, that there has been the strong shared notion among the Trump administration and its public that America wished to get the payback from what they have invested. That's over past so many decades. So that when listening to the confirmation of the Bridge Colby, who has been appointed as the Vice Deputy Secretary for the Department of Defense, asking Japan to spend 3% of the GDP, asking Taiwan to spend 10%, and then there's ongoing demand to pressure Europe to spend 5% of the GDP, which is quite I think, transformative view about what is the optimum sharing of the commitments in the alliance. And the United States is asking that there should be the major reconfiguration to take place if the alliance needs to work in the level of the expectation that the allies needs to play out. And which really creates so many domestic pressure in the transatlantic relationship and also in East Asia, starting from Tokyo, Seoul, probably in Australia as well. And if we probably really need to adapt ourselves because the security environment surrounding Japan is eroding. Obviously, that requires a lot from Japan to step up its own defense commitment for our defense. But in order to make the alliance and the regional structure, including those multilateral cooperation, could stay still, that needs to be more, I think, at the individual investment in those participating like-minded states needs to spend more resources in order to make this happen. And I'm sure that the investment that we have made in past years has been tremendous. And I think that ongoing process of the Ishiba, Trump, Modi, Trump, those kind of transactions seems to be very stable, is the result of the investment that we have in the past years. And I think that that is not enough, and in the sense of the White House, and which is I think that the huge demands and adaptation that allies needs to make.
Thank you.
Okay, just two quick points on the alliances and China. From what Professor Ken just said, for decades, the US was a country that did not want Germany and Japan to spend too much on defense. So a lot of countries got used to that. And now suddenly they want, dramatic, swift increases in defense expenditures from these countries, especially among the allies. And the implication, long-term implication of that is this is a call to arms. We will see a massive rearmament of key countries in Europe, especially Japan and Germany. And the implication, when you have a lot of armament, is not good. This is a bad time to be a US ally. Some years from now, it could be that Thailand could get lucky, If you look at the 5 alliances the US have in Asia, Japan, ROK, Australia, Philippines, and Thailand. Thailand is the least performing. Least performing is a non-performing ally. But in fact, maybe it was far-sighted. Being a US ally now is counterproductive because the US feels that the countries that rip them off the most are the allies. Look at Canada, Europe, Japan. So maybe Thailand saw it earlier. I don't think so. I think it's just luck again. Maybe some years from now, we might end up saying, "Oh, well, Thailand moved a little bit away from the U.S. before anybody else, all the allies." So I think this the alliance system for the U.S. now is all shaken and really in the disarray because suddenly you have to reallocate resources, and being ally now is actually a liability. U.S. treaty allies are a liability, and for Thailand, you don't even count on the treaty alliance for dealing with the U.S. In fact, Japan would feel this the most. The other point about China is raised about, I think this is a time, if Trump goes too far, he's going to push a lot of countries into China's embrace, to China's orbit. And you already see some countries already moving that direction. Indonesia joined BRICS as a member, Thailand, Malaysia as partners. Vietnam almost did, except that they have very high trade surplus, so they refrain for now. And you see more moves going in that direction, away from the US if Trump pushes too far, second Trump. And I think for China, this is a grand opportunity for China to have that kind of leadership if it plays its cards right, which means that it has to be benevolent and kind of cultivate a kind of an Asian order that can be the basis of an international order. And this is a time that all countries will look to China, not just for BRI and all the initiatives, global development, security, civilization, and all of that. So this is a time really for China to think and calibrate its geostrategy because the U.S. is shirking a lot of responsibilities and making and actually leaving a lot of gaps to be filled.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're running out of time. All the panelists, left a lot of issues that we probably could discuss in the second sessions, and suitably, it's about secondary powers and secondary state, India, especially Japan, and Europe. So probably these are the fundamental issues that we can elaborate in the next two sessions. So thank you again, and give me a big applause to all the speakers. Thank you to Jufeng and Yunfeng who came picking up. So we have like around 15 minutes break, and we a little bit later from our schedule. So please come back around 11:10 or 5 to 11:10. Thank you very much.